Achilles is the one who was meant to be the son of Zeus. He was meant to be immortal and meant to maybe even overthrow his father and be the king of the heavens. Instead, he's immortal. And Justin, I think you can imagine that throughout his young life, his mother probably kept reminding him, "Oh, my son, you short-lived of all people." And that's what she says throughout the Iliad every time she sees him. In fact, every time she sees somebody else, she says, "Have you heard about my son, Achilles? Most short-lived of all mortals." So you can imagine that Achilles will be obsessed with his own mortality. And to me, that's the backstory behind the Iliad. Here is a human being wrestling with his own mortality.
Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
Look at it from a different perspective.
Hey, what is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because you have chosen wisely, because we are about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Justin, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus lens to take a second look at everything. Hey, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Be sure and hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Down below, we'll have our socials. Come down and check us out on our various platforms, and that would be much appreciated. But today we got a returning guest. We got Lou Markos. We had a great conversation in my very first episode on the hero's journey. We recently had him on with Dr. Judd Burton, and we talked about the Greek Dark Ages and kind of laid out a timeline. It was a real good conversation just to be a fly on the wall and sit in. So I asked Lou to come back and take a deeper dive into the Iliad. So I'd like to welcome Lou back to the show. Lou, thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Good to be back on.
And we extended the invite to Dr. Judd. He has some engagements he has, but I did send the email. He said that he may come in if he has time, so we may get a swing-in guest in the middle of this discussion.
Great.
Well, for those that maybe missed those other episodes, Lou, just give everybody an introduction and let everybody know a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks. My name is Lou Markos, and I'm a professor of English, scholar in residence at Houston Christian University. We used to be called Houston Baptist, and I've been teaching there for 33 years. Grew up in New Jersey, went to Colgate in upstate New York, then on to University of Michigan. As an English professor, I teach the Romantic and Victorian poets, but I also do anything and everything with ancient Greece and Rome, and also with C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And I've published lots of books, and lots of my books are about bringing Athens and Jerusalem together. That means let's take our Greco-Roman heritage and our Judeo-Christian heritage and try to bring them together. So I write books with names like From Achilles to Christ, or From Plato to Christ, or next year From Aristotle to Christ, or The Myth Made Fact. And so I'm always interested in mythology and in archetypes, in what we can learn from myths and stories and these archetypes, these images or events or themes that keep repeating themselves across all different cultures and all different times. And what we like to do, like you do, Justin, is to follow the argument wherever it leads. And so we want to go on a thinking holiday, if you will. And I love above all the epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, Dante's Divine Comedy, Milton's Paradise Lost, all the way on up to Wordsworth's Prelude and Tennyson's In Memoriam. So I am particularly an epic fanboy.
All right, me too. And the thing is some people find it hard to separate whether these are historical accounts or these just, stories, legends, myths. Uh, is there a distinction in these, and what's your opinion on the Iliad?
I mean, normally when we talk about a myth like Perseus cutting off the head of Medusa, we seem to be in a very mythic world, more of a fantasy world. But when we move into legend, I think we've got a core of historical stuff, but it's elaborated on. And the best example of this in the world, in the sort of Northern European world, are the stories of King Arthur. I think there probably was a King Arthur, probably sometime between the downfall of Rome and the sort of Anglo-Saxons taking over. Arthur seems to have been a transitional figure. He probably didn't do all the things that he does in the legends, but I think based in a real historical event and a real historical period, we start elaborating. A good thing I remember doing a report as a kid on the Three Musketeers, and it turns out that there probably was an Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and some of the things that happen in the Three Musketeers probably happened, but not at the same time and with the same people. So Dumas is joining things together. Maybe there was an Achilles, but maybe he didn't do everything that we attribute to him. But I think when we're in the world of legend, we have a foot in history and attempt to understand our past and what we stand for. Maybe the best simple example of legend is the story of George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie, Father. Well, apparently most historians nowadays say that never happened. But in one sense, it doesn't make a difference because we hold on to that because it tells us that our first president and America values honesty. I don't know if that's true anymore, Justin, but it was true at a certain time. So legends like that have a foot in reality and are probably capturing a real memory. And we talked about this a little bit before with Judd. A lot of legends are carried down by the oral tradition, where it's passed down by a series of bards. And those things were studied a lot. And it turns out that the oral tradition is much more reliable than we often think. I'm so tired, Justin, of the new atheists when they talk about the Bible or the gospel stories. They always say, didn't you ever play the game telephone where you whisper in somebody's ear? First of all, I played telephone as a kid, and it never was wacko. Okay, first of all, they have this idea. And second of all, the oral tradition is not a game. I mean, the oral tradition, especially amongst the Jews and the scribes passing things down, there was a system and a method to it that was reliable. It wasn't just some kid's game. It was, especially the oral tradition, it's when a civilization is illiterate. How are they going to carry down their values and their beliefs and the heroic acts of their ancestors, their forefathers? Well, they carry it down in an oral tradition until it is written down. Now, a lot of people say Genesis was oral tradition, and they think that means it's not true. Well, it doesn't mean it's not true. I do believe Moses gathered together the oral tradition, but he did it under the direct inspiration of God. Right? So just saying something is oral tradition doesn't mean it is not true. Again, people play these games. We just get this idea.
Takes away value.
And, you know what I mean, Justin? You've heard it. This ridiculous notion about telephone, and that's what's going on. And it is not going on that way in any shape or form. Our ancestors are always smarter than we think they are. Let's put it that way. They're the ones that built those incredible buildings that we still don't know how they did it. We don't know how they got those giant stones up mountains and things like that. So we have to have a little humility and avoid what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. The idea that newer must be better and older must be ignorant. And if we don't believe in something anymore, it must have been disproven. But nobody ever disproved miracles. David Hume thought he did, the shoddiest chapter I've ever read. He did not disprove miracles in any shape or form. But people still think that because, not most people, but the literary people don't believe it, it's been disproven. And nobody ever disproved it. They just stopped believing in it because they don't like accountability, basically.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, too, is, you look back and you talked about the megalithic structures and the legends, and yeah, they might have, elaborated, and stretched the truth a little bit, or, added some things to make the story more, fantastical. But at the same time, it's like you look at things like the Great Pyramid,
Right.
Machu Picchu and all this stuff. And it's like, we can't do it today. And then the stuff they did try to build later was couldn't hold a candle to it. So it's
No.
like it's reverse. It's, you think things, you get better at building things and doing things over time, but in fact, when we look in history, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
They're trying to recreate some of these things, and it's a really crappy job or a crappy imitation. So it's like, we don't know what that world looked like back then. It might have been straight up Tolkien,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Medusa, snakehead people and
Oh,
stuff.
and so many people have done these things where they'll take a picture of, like an image on a temple or something of a dragon, and then they'll put it next to a dinosaur, and they often look quite alike. I mean, it's amazing. And all over the world, these talks of dragons and things like that. So again, a little humility. I mean, also the ancient world was more fluid than we think, going back and forth, traveling back and forth,
Yeah.
engaged in trade and things like that. And it's just like today, where trading partners are all of a sudden enemies, and they have a war, and then after the war, they become trading partners again. So, and this idea of not understanding the difference between the absolute fact and a legend. How many times have you seen a movie based on historical events? And it is basically true, but it's been dramatized, and certain characters are collapsed together. The timetable is usually collapsed, but we still recognize it as a mostly true account of something that happened in history. So we can imagine it in film, but then we see it in an ancient book, and we want to just, I don't know, somehow dismiss it as all just myth.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we go into the Iliad itself, and basically for those that are unfamiliar with it, it's a Greek epic, and it's about the 10-year Trojan War, and it starts off basically, and you kind of get a backstory of one of the main characters in the story of Achilles.
Right.
You want to go into
the backstory.
Achilles?
So who is Achilles? Okay, well, it's a very interesting backstory that you almost have to know it before you start reading the Iliad, which is kind of what's expected. Just like anybody watches a life of Christ, they kind of know what's going to happen, right? I think they know that he's not going to be let go, right? But anyway, we bring it into this. So the backstory
Genesis
is
6, prime example.
Oh, well, that's true.
They didn't elaborate much because everyone knew that story, and they had the Enoch oral tradition, and
and so it's almost just a little bit of a trigger to say, okay, you know this, now let's move on to the other details. So there was Zeus, right? Now, first there was a guy named Uranos, the heaven, and Uranos was overthrown by his son Kronos, and then later on, Kronos was overthrown by his son Zeus. Now, Zeus, the god that we know, Jupiter for the Romans, and Zeus heard a prophecy that he would have a son that would overthrow him. And he wanted to stop this from happening. And so he said, I have to identify who the goddess is who will give birth to a son that is stronger than his father. If I can figure out who that goddess is, I will keep her as far away from me as possible, and so I will avoid this fate falling upon me. But he didn't know who that person was. So Justin, he turned to your buddy, Mr. Prometheus, whose name means forethought. And he said, tell me the name of the goddess. And Prometheus knew, but he wouldn't tell him because originally Prometheus had actually helped Zeus to overthrow his fellow Titans because he believed that Zeus was more civilized, more just. But afterwards, Zeus became a little more tyrannical. One of the things he did was he was cruel to the humans he created. And that's why Prometheus stole the fire to help man. And everybody knows that Prometheus was put on the rock, right? And the eagle comes every day and devours his liver. And during the night, it grows back. so the next day the eagle can come and devour his liver again. And Justin, as I tell my students, people think that's a myth, but that eagle actually exists. It's called the IRS. See, they devour winter money, they let it grow back, they devour it again. So there are always truth in myths. So, but what everybody thinks the only reason Zeus did that was because he stole the fire. But the other reason he did it in myth is that he would not divulge the name of the goddess. Well, after being punished on the rock for 1,000 years, finally there was a reconciliation between the two. Hercules actually freed him, and he told Zeus the name of the goddess was Thetis, goddess of the sea. And so Zeus is like, that's it. I'm never going to go near you. But that was not enough. He said, the only way I can diffuse the danger is I'm going to force Thetis to marry a mortal man. Right? And that's cruel because the mortal man will grow old and die. Thetis will stay young forever. So she forces her to marry Peleus, a Greek king. But then Zeus feels bad about it. And so he decides, okay, to make up for it, I am going to give her the best wedding party that anyone has ever had. We're going to hold it up on Mount Olympus. We're going to invite everyone. It is going to be the wedding of the season. But because they wanted it to be fun, they did not invite Eris, E-R-I-S, which is the Greek word for discord or strife. She's the goddess of discord. Nobody wants her to come. Well, of course, she found out and she crashed the party. Very similar to Maleficent in the Sleeping Beauty stories. So Eris comes, but instead of insulting everybody, she takes a apple out of gold. She fashions a golden apple and she writes on it, "To the fairest." And then she throws it into the group and then she leaves. And immediately all the gods and goddesses claim the apple for themselves. After a long fight, after all the feathers come down and everything, there's 3 goddesses that refuse to relinquish the apple. One of them is Hera, the wife of Zeus. The other one is Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and also the daughter of Zeus. And the third is Aphrodite, also Zeus's daughter, the goddess of love. And all of them claim the apple. And they go to Zeus and say, "You choose." And Zeus says, "I'm not falling into this trap. You ladies are all pretty in your own way." He's not messing around with it. None of the gods will answer. Of course, they're smart. But these vain goddesses won't accept that. And so they go to the earth to find a stupid mortal who will judge. And they go down to what is modern-day Turkey, and they find a shepherd named Paris leaning on his staff. And boom, they show up in front of him, 3 beautiful naked goddesses. And they say, "You choose who the fairest is." But because they're vain, they want to hedge their bets. And so one by one, they go up and whisper into Paris's ear a bribe. And so Hera says, "Give me the apple, and I will make you the greatest king of all time." And then Athena whispers in his ear, "Give me the apple, and I will make you the greatest soldier, greatest of all warriors." And then Aphrodite, Venus, says, "Give me the apple, and I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world." And Paris, being young and stupid, chooses Aphrodite and gives her the apple, making perpetual enemies with Hera and Athena. Now, he should have read the fine print, because if you find the most beautiful woman in the world, she's probably already married to somebody else. She wasn't waiting around for you, bozo. Come on. So, sort of turned out. The most beautiful in the world was named Helen. And she was married.
She's good for you. She's good for a few. That's what I've heard.
Right. That's good. See, that's a good way to put it. It's like, one waiting for you, buddy. And so her name is Helen, and she's married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta, which is where my family is from, by the way, Sparta. So now we need backstory to the backstory, because who's Helen? Well, one day Zeus fell in love, or we should really say he fell in lust, with a mortal woman named Leda, L-E-D-A. And so he came down to seduce her, but in the form of a swan. There's a famous poem by William Butler Yeats called Leda and the Swan, and many, many famous paintings of that event, Leda and the Swan. She becomes pregnant. 9 months later, she gives birth to an egg. Out of the egg pops Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Vick. I'm the founder of Squatch Survival Gear, and today I'm here to talk to you about some of our most popular packs. In 2017, I founded Squatch Survival Gear because I was tired of seeing low-quality, mass-produced packs flooding the American market. I decided I'd make a pack that was 100% designed and manufactured in the United States, and today I'm here to talk to you about some of our most popular packs. This is the Night Howler. It was designed for EDC and travelers. As you can see, it's small. It's roughly 10 by 12 inches. It's designed for everyday carry. The pass-through pad allows you to put it on your luggage when you travel. This is the Rougarou. It's very civilianized, lots of attachment points. This is a 25-liter pack. We designed it for a little lighter load. If you need more than the Night Howler, you should try this. This is the Mothman, very similar to the Rougarou, roughly the same size, but it's designed for carrying a much heavier load. The removable waist belt will help you carry that extra load. You've also got your retaining strap if you're going to take that on a travel trip. This is the Kakamora. This would be your first 72-hour pack, as we used to say in the Army. It comes with an internal frame, totally adjustable straps, heavily padded. You can carry heavy loads, carry lots of gear. This is the Rock Ape. It's a 45-liter pack. Same internal frame, same great padded straps that you like, with a few extra features. If you're wondering what's with all the crazy names, well, that's because finding 100% American made is as hard as finding Bigfoot in the woods. When you're ready to carry our packs, contact us at squatchsurvivalgear.com or any of our social medias.
Hey, if you're tuning in every single week, then that means you enjoyed the content. But did you know that there's an all-access pass for less than one stop at McDonald's? It can get you a month's worth of members-only episodes, access to a private community of like-minded brothers and sisters. This also gives you a monthly Q&A with authors and speakers and guests that we've had on the show. And not only is this just all for you, you are also helping to ensure that I keep doing this show each and every single week. So if you enjoy the content, hey, help me out with a cheeseburger or a Happy Meal once a month, and you will see every bit of that get reinvested into this show and things that will just filter straight back to you, the listener. So head on over to PrometheusLensPodcast.com, follow the members link, and I'll see you guys on the other side.
Now, at this time, Greece is a bunch of separate city-states with their own kings scattered across, kind of like Italy was until 150 years ago, all separate states. And they all wanted Helen as their wife, kind of a trophy wife. So Helen's earthly father said, look, I don't want a civil war here. So we're going to hold an event, sort of like an Olympics, right? We'll all compete, and whoever wins can have my daughter's hand in marriage. So they got together. They were about to compete, but then Odysseus, who's smart, says, wait a minute. What if somebody wins and somebody else steals her away? We're still going to have a war. So they all put their hands together, and they pledge that whoever wins the contest will be the rightful husband of Helen, and they will all defend him if Helen is stolen away. Well, you can see where this is going. Paris gets on a ship and he goes to visit Menelaus. Menelaus, being a good Greek host, takes him in, feeds him, gives him clothes, gives him a gift. And when he leaves to thank his host, Paris steals his wife. Whether Helen went willingly, whether she was really in love with Paris, whether she was forced to do so by Aphrodite, whatever reason, Helen goes off with Paris and they leave. Now, all of this would have been okay, except for the fact, Justin, that Paris is not just a shepherd. Paris is the son of King Priam, king of Troy, which is right on the Dardanelles across from Gallipoli. And what happened was, just before he was born, there was a prophecy that this child would destroy the city. And so, kind of like now the Snow White legend, they had somebody take the baby to die, but instead they felt pity, and so they gave the baby, what we call a foundling, to be raised by a shepherd out there. And that's probably why in the Iliad he has two different names. He's called Paris, but he's also called Alexander. And I think that Paris was probably his shepherd name and Alexander was probably his throne name. But that's probably why he has two different names in the Iliad. In fact, Alexander is used more often than Paris, oddly. But anyway, so when he goes back, it's kind of hard to figure out who realizes what. But instead, he ends up going back to Paris, and his father, foolishly or whatnot, decides to defend his son. Maybe he still feels guilty. And that's what kicks off the Trojan War. Now, you would think Menelaus would lead the troops, However, because his brother Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, was the strongest, and archaeology has shown us that Mycenae was the most splendid, golden Mycenae, as Homer calls it, was so splendid. We now know that's true. And so he led a vast navy across the Aegean from Greece over to modern-day Turkey and fought a war. Now, what's interesting about this is I mentioned the wedding of Thetis and Peleus. Well, they had a son, and his name is Achilles. So Achilles is the mortal hero because the way Greek mythology works, you only get to be a god if both your mother and father are gods. If it's one and one, you end up being immortal. You might be beautiful like Helen or strong like Achilles, but you're still immortal. And mortal, not immortal. You're not immortal.
Yeah.
So Achilles is the one who was meant to be the son of Zeus. He was meant to be immortal and meant to maybe even overthrow his father and be the king of the heavens. Instead, he's immortal. And Justin, I think you can imagine that throughout his young life, his mother probably kept reminding him, "Oh, my son, most short-lived of all people." And that's what she says throughout the Iliad every time she sees him. In fact, every time she sees somebody else, she says, "Have you heard about my son, Achilles? Most short-lived of all mortals." So you can imagine that Achilles will be obsessed with his own mortality. And to me, that's the backstory behind the Iliad. Here is a human being wrestling with his own mortality. The first half of the book, he is enraged. The first line of the book is the wrath or the rage of Achilles. The first word is rage, maiden, rage or wrath. And it's a word that's only usually used of Apollo or Zeus. Only of Achilles is it used of a mortal. So it's
and you kind of have that occult ritual symbolism stuff too, where she's so worried about him, she does this ritual where she dips him into the river Styx to protect him from any mortal blows from a human that only a god could harm him.
And, you know, a lot of people have heard the phrase the Achilles heel. And according to the overall legend, Achilles died when Paris took a poisoned arrow and shot it, and Apollo guided it into Achilles' heel and killed him. But the funny thing, Justin, is that Homer, though he would have known the story from the oral tradition, never, ever mentions the Achilles heel. And to me, it's clear he wants us to understand that Achilles is the greatest soldier who ever took to the field, not because of a trick, but because he's the greatest soldier. They actually make fun of it in the movie Troy, where Brad Pitt actually does quite a good job playing Achilles. And somebody comes up to him and says, "Hey, I heard you have impervious skin." And Brad Pitt says, "Really? Then why do I bother wearing armor?" They kind of make fun of it. But it's a good thing because there's a big difference between Greek mythology and the Bible. Okay, Greek mythology is filled with contradictions because every poet and playwright tells the story the way they want. Now, they can't change huge differences. The movie Troy is a very good movie, except for the fact that in the movie, they kill Menelaus, which is something you absolutely positively cannot do. Menelaus is one of the few people that got home and had a good homecoming. So that was wrong. But other things, you're allowed to play with them, like King Arthur. I mean, eventually, Lancelot and Guinevere have to have an affair, and Arthur, and, you know, there's certain, it's a tragic story in the end, but you can change it all different ways and play with it and whatnot. So Homer wants to give us a pure soldier who is wrestling with his mortality. And there's that deep level for a Christian leader. You know, in a sense, we're all wrestling with our mortality because, you know, we were supposed to be immortal in the garden, right? We weren't supposed to die. And I think
like the Gilgamesh epic too.
Say it again.
The Gilgamesh epic, you know, a great warrior battling with his immortality.
That's right. He tries to get it and he loses it, right? And the horror of that. I mean, that's deeply written into our DNA, right? Into you know, I love it how, you know, Jungian people talking about archetypes, they always talk about all of these archetypes, all of these you know, images come out of the collective unconscious, which is wonderful. Just because you give a name to something doesn't mean you understand it. Where did the collective unconscious come from? Right? We're created. We have souls, right? I mean, it's just so funny that people come up with a name for something and think they've explained away a supernatural element. This is kind of crazy. I think we do have a collective unconscious. We recognize these archetypes. And that's one of the reasons Jordan Peterson is so powerful. He talks about those archetypes. He doesn't seem to be a believer yet, but he's certainly on the way. I wrote an essay recently where I started by saying, I think more people are praying for Jordan Peterson than any other celebrity in the world right now. I really think we're all like, come on, when are you going to become a Christian? His daughter is, his wife is. He's coming along. But he recognizes, that's why, even though Jordan Peterson still, as far as I can tell, doesn't believe in the historical accuracy of Genesis, he understands what it means, right? Like he understands the deep meaning and the deep lesson. I just hope someday he can see that, as C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and Chesterton would have said, it's a true myth. It's true because it actually happened. It's a myth because it speaks to our deepest needs and desires. It answers questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is my purpose? All of this sort of stuff. So you can have that. Now, again, the Iliad and the Odyssey are not historical in the way the Bible is, but they're very, very human. They understand. I like to say when you read the pagan classics, they may not have all the answers the way the Bible does, but they ask the questions in a very powerful way, and they understand what it is we need to wrestle with as mortal human beings who have an aspect to us that is immortal, our soul, our spirit, and we realize that. Even the secular psychiatrists talk about how we cannot imagine our own death. It's like impossible to even imagine our own extinction. We understand there is something within us that persists. And I think one of the things that makes the Iliad so powerful is our hero wrestling. And so the first half of the book, his rage is against Agamemnon because Agamemnon stole away his war prize. The second half of the book, roughly, his wrath is against Hector because Hector killed his best friend Patroclus. Not his cousin, which they ludicrously say in the movie, but his best friend. But the real rage of Achilles is ultimately against his own mortality, wrestling against it. As in a sense, we all must wrestle with our mortality. It's not the way it should have been.
Yeah. And that was something, he is brought up and his mother's a goddess, and I'm sure he's, gooed and God over, told about how great he's going to be. And the story reads like he's a giant. It talks about, he's this huge man, but not only is he just huge, he's the fastest. It says that he could outrun horses.
Swift-footed. Good.
Yeah. And just everyone feared him, and that his armor, was just spectacular, and it glowed, and just that he just looked like this god, out in the field, and that people seen him and trembled and ran away. And
you think he's a Nephilim? Is that what you think? You think he was a Nephilim?
That's how he's described.
I mean, there's one scene when Achilles can't go back in because he needs new armor because Hector stole his armor. And he wants to help his men, so he walks up to the line of battle and he lets out a war cry. And the war cry is so terrifying that people immediately fall on their spears and are trampled and die. I mean, that's the terror. And the one scene when Achilles puts on his armor, see if I can find it, it sounds exactly like Goliath. It's kind of an amazing. And, Goliath may be the last of the Nephilim. Let me see if I can find
the how that armor was described too. It talked about the Enthesia, or what's his name, Hephaestus.
That's the one who makes the armor. That's the blacksmith of the gods.
He was a Titan.
Yeah, that's true.
He forges all the weapons for the gods. So it's kind of like I thought of Marduk in the Enuma Elish.
Oh, that's true. That's right.
They forge, these weapons for this god to go into this epic battle. And then this shield, it talks about, it's like cosmology.
It is the whole world. You're right. All around it,
yes.
the constellations and everything.
And the constellations around it. And
And they believed that at the center was the Mediterranean, and around it was all the land. But then around the land was ocean with a capital O that went all the way around. And in the full version of Oliver Stone's movie Alexandra, which is better than everybody said, it's still worth watching, especially his director's cut, which is 3.5 hours. It seemed that Alexander thought if he got down to India, he could grab a hold of ocean and go back on the ocean. And of course, they didn't realize that's not exactly the way the world looks, but they're putting the whole thing. But listen when he puts it on. This is from book 19. First, Achilles placed along his legs the fair greaves linked with silver fastenings to hold the greaves at the ankles. Afterward, he girt on about his chest the corslet, and across his shoulders slung the sword with the nails of silver, a bronze sword, and caught up the great shield, huge and heavy next. That sounds just like 1 Samuel as Goliath is putting on his armor with his huge, right? And it's interesting that, this is the Mycenaean Bronze Age, and Achilles has a bronze-ass spear that's so big, only he can wield it. And when he allows his friend Patroclus to wear his armor, he does not give him the Pelian ash spear of his father, because even Patroclus can't wield it. So there is a power to that. These amazing figures of power and strength. And when he fights Victor, it's like two gods fighting each other or something.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, because he controlled the tempo of the war. Yeah. He fought at first, and they were dominating. Right. The only thing that was keeping them safe, the Trojans, was their walls. And then when his war prize, which was a woman, was stolen from him, he's like, well, I ain't going to fight for you no more.
Good.
And he stops fighting. And then that's when the Trojans start swinging the war and start winning again. And like you said, his friend takes his armor and goes into battle trying to rally the men and thinking that Achilles is with them, and just his presence, them thinking that he was there, rallied them, and they pushed the Trojans back to the wall. But Hector ends up killing him, thinking it's him, steals his armor, and then that's when it pisses him off enough that he's going to go in and fight. And his mom goes and has him some new armor forged by the gods, and goes and kills Hector, and drags his body across the camp for 3 days. And I mean, just his presence alone swung the entire war.
It is terrifying. And if the book ended there in book 22 with him defiling the body, we'd be living in a different world. But what happens in book 24 is that Priam, the father, sneaks into the Greek camp, helped by Mercury, and there's a reconciliation between Achilles and Priam. And in this amazing, amazing moment from the Mycenaean Bronze Age, we have two great enemies. What's that?
That was powerful.
It was, yeah. The two enemies. And I watched an interview with Peter O'Toole, the great actor Peter O'Toole, who in the movie Troy plays Priam. And he said, the reason I wanted to do the movie, he said, agreed to it, is to be able to say the lines where Priam says, "Have pity on me. I kiss the hands of the man who killed my son," and all my sons, actually. He killed almost all of Priam's sons. And that moment in which, that human moment where they grieve together. And actually, Achilles is grieving for Patroclus, and Priam is grieving for Hector. They're not even grieving for the same person, but together they grieve and acknowledge their shared humanity. Because as I teach my student, what it means to be mortal is not just that you will die. It means that if you live long enough, you will have to grieve the loss of people you love. And sometimes that's the hardest part of being mortal. Even if you're a Christian, you have full faith that you will be with the Lord, you're still going to lose people. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, right? So it's not the way. I don't want to scare the Calvinists, but we're living in Plan B. Okay, we're supposed to be in the garden. Okay, we're living in Plan B. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And I believe that just as you've heard the little poem, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. We do participate in the sin of Adam. Original sin, total depravity, whatever you want to call it. We participate in the sin of Adam. But I would argue if we participate in the sin of Adam, then we must also participate in those few days that he was in the garden. I think we have an antenatal or prenatal memory of Eden. That's why I think every one of us says the world should be better than it is. Well, the world's never been better than it is, but we have, and the Greeks and Romans, they had a memory. They called it the Golden Age. They didn't call it the Garden of Eden, but it was the Golden Age when man and nature, everybody was together, and even with the gods. There was a time of peace. Men did not build ships and go to war. They did not dig into the earth to rape it of its jewels. They lived simple lives, and I hate to say it, but sometimes they said they lived vegetarian lives. We from Texas know that no. I mean, we know that in the Garden of Eden that the fruit actually tasted like filet mignon, right, Justin? I think we're sure of that.
That's right. Yeah.
But there is that memory of that memory of Eden that I think is there, and of what Milton calls paradise lost. We have a memory that we have lost paradise, and the world should not be the way it is. That's what we always want to say. Oh, maybe 50 years ago things were better. Well, no, we've never lived in a perfect world unless, in fact, the Garden of Eden is true, as I believe it is, and we have that memory in us, and we struggle with that. Again, they had celebrations looking back to that time of innocence that's been lost.
Yeah, and being reminded of his humanity and his mortality is kind of the trigger for Achilles, because of course he's upset at the loss of his friend, but his mother appears to him and tells him, if you go into battle, there will be a great victory. You will slay Hector, and men will sing your praises for centuries, but you will not go. You will not see home. And he willingly chooses it. And then when he starts, defiling Hector's body and everything else, Zeus tells his mother, go down and tell him to give the body up and show some decency and respect, because his days are numbered also.
Right.
So then he's like, okay, I agree. So then that's when Hermes goes to Priam and tells him in a dream, go to Achilles. He's going to give up the body. So he needed a little bit of a reminder, like, hey, you're going to be in the land of Sheol pretty soon, and if you don't want me to shoving pineapples up your butt in the afterlife, you better be nice here.
Yeah, it is like I said, it's amazing, and when Achilles pulls out of the war, he's trying to come up with a different way to run society, one that doesn't take war, one that allows for peace, but it doesn't work. They're in the midst of a war. It doesn't work, and his attempt to pull out, to not go back in, I should say, leads to the death of Patroclus. I compare it to one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, is that World War I is a war, I believe, that could have been avoided with better diplomacy. It didn't have to happen. I mean, it just fell apart. It was crazy. It was not a necessary war. And after World War I, there was a serious peace movement in Europe. I mean, it's not people that don't want to get drafted and go to war. I mean, I'm talking about serious people that are older anyway. They wouldn't even be drafted, right? So they're more objective, if you will. And there was an attempt to bring peace. But the trouble was that they had exactly the right idea at exactly the wrong time. Because Hitler was somebody that they had to fight. If we didn't fight, then we're going to just keep taking over and over. People don't realize that what was called the First Gulf War, that's even before you probably, but I remember it. The First Gulf War, which was when Iraq was trying to take Kuwait. And everybody said, well, no, Iraq had like the third strongest army in the world at the time. And if we did nothing, it might have been a Hitler kind of thing where you can't stop them as they go again and again and again and again. But the trouble was, because of this very good peace movement, good ideas, they delayed fighting Hitler. And by the time they realized it, Hitler's army was so immense, he was unstoppable. If they had stopped Hitler way back in the beginning when he went into, the Sudetenland, they could have stopped him right there, be no problem. But they waited too long. And so that's the tragedy of the right idea at the wrong time. And that's kind of what happens with Achilles. But he gives us this idea. He even suggests it. In book 9, Agamemnon realizes he was stupid. And so he sends Ajax and Odysseus and Phoenix, who was Achilles' tutor as a boy, sends him in a deputation, an embassy, to beg Achilles to come back, and offers him this incredible amount of war prizes, including giving
His
back
daughter?
war prizes. Yeah, one of his own daughters. I mean, it's unbelievably generous, and there's no reason why Achilles shouldn't come back in. Everything in the society tells him, accept this and come back in, but he doesn't. And part of it is he's angry and resentful, but it's more than that, because he says that not worth the value of my life are all the prizes that were won at Troy. Then he says, amazingly, he says, they're trying to take these gifts. You'll have so much honor, which it's an honor-based society. And he says, such honor is a thing I need not. That's like, I don't know, Elon Musk or something saying another $1 billion is something I don't need. I mean, no, it doesn't make any difference. It makes sense, right? That this is the poster boy for the honor-based warrior society, where they call it the meeds of honor system. You're gathering meeds.
So he really was struggling with the thought of death. See, that's the thing, because I don't have the extensive works. I just have smaller books that are summarizations, and they don't portray that.
Yeah, because it's a little more subtle when you read it, but he actually says, not worth the value of mine. Then he says, he goes, okay, such honor is a thing I need not. I believe I'm already honored under the aegis of Zeus, because I have breath in my lungs and spring in my knees. What he's saying is, I have value simply because I'm alive. Now, I hope we believe that today in our Christian world, or at least Christian influence world, that every human being has intrinsic value and worth simply because they're alive. But that's not really what Achilles believes. You have to read very carefully in book 9 to see these incredible, shocking things that Achilles are saying, things that are inconceivable, to borrow from The Princess Bride, inconceivable. And when he says it, everybody's like, oh, what are you talking about? This is not the way we think. Nobody understands. And of course, Achilles can't do anything with it because nobody knows what he's talking about. And we're going to have to wait. Well, ultimately, we have to wait to Jesus. But first, we have to wait to Socrates and Plato, where we see a little bit of that truth coming in. But ultimately, it's going to be Jesus. And so again, all of these things are happening. It's that tragedy. And because he won't go in, he allows Achilles. And, the Iliad is very civilized, because you have to take good advice. Achilles tells Patroclus, once you rout the enemy and send them away, do not go after Hector, or he will kill you.
What a really unique book. And I love that your first book is something that is unique, and it's not something that's been written before. When I first started, my very, very first book was a self-published book that, looking back, I don't think it's really all that great now. And I think you got a topic here that I haven't seen anybody write a book on. I mean, I not anything that I'm aware of. And it's really interesting. It's unique. There's a lot to learn, and I think it can actually provide a lot of context for people. So congratulations on your first book, and thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing it with us.
And he goes after Hector, and he's killed. Then Hector is warned, don't kill Patroclus or your death will follow, and he doesn't listen. And then Achilles is warned, don't kill Hector or your death, and he doesn't listen. Now his death happens outside the Iliad, but we know it's going to happen very soon, and ultimately the downfall. But so the Iliad is a world where it values honor and strength and prowess on the battlefield, but it also honors the wisdom of experience. We don't have a legal justice system back then. To my students, I say the closest is if you watch Pocahontas and see the old men sitting in a circle and making decisions. That's what you have. When things work well, you have the wise counselors who have the wisdom of experience that will speak together. People like Nestor or Priam, who have this experience. And when they listen to those people, things go well. But when they throw off good advice and are reckless, it leads to their downfall.
Yeah, that's a biblical theme too. I mean, it talks about the elders.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and listen, and I mean, as I like to tell to my students, Solomon is the wisest man who ever lived. That doesn't mean Solomon was a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist. The wisdom of Solomon was not the specialized wisdom that we overprize today. It was the wisdom of experience. It's what the Bible calls discernment. And discernment comes with age and experience. And remember, do you remember why Solomon asks God for wisdom? Remember why?
You have to better rule his people.
Yeah, because I'm a young man. I don't know, 20, whatever. He's a young man. I'm a young man. And exactly, how can I rule these people? So I'm looking for the wisdom that I might get when I'm 65. I don't have it when I'm 20. And God gives him that wisdom. And the Proverbs, what we call proverbial wisdom, is the wisdom of experience.
Yep. Now with the Iliad focusing more like on like Paris, what do you think like his overall arching theme or archetype or morality teaching lesson is? Because like with me, when I seen that, I just got mad reading it, honestly. Because when I was reading it, especially, he comes out and he's like, he acts like he's all brave. He's like, I'll end this war. Not another man will die. I will challenge somebody one-on-one and I'll defeat them and they'll go home. He gets his butt whooped. And then instead of dying honorably, he runs away and hides. And then during the war, they can't find him. He's up in the bedchambers of the women hiding. Hector calls him a girl and has to drag him back out on the battlefield. And then here's Achilles just defeated Hector, and he's out there and fighting valiantly, just defeating all these people. And then here's Paris, hiding way back away, away from danger in the safety of the wall, and shoots an arrow guided by Apollo, and kills the great warrior Achilles. I'm like, what a freaking coward.
Yeah, he's kind of a pretty boy. There's one point I point out to my students where it says he dressed up and he slung a leopard hide over himself. And that's what I tell my students. You didn't know that Paris was the first cheetah girl. But yeah, he is. He's not very, and you can tell Helen's getting tired of this good-for-nothing boy. She wishes she'd run off with Hector or somebody worthwhile. So Paris, it's not exactly that Paris is evil, but he's more cowardly and he, in one sense, he lacks the will, but sometimes he's also very impulsive and does silly things like stealing away Helen. So he can be very impulsive, like a child. He doesn't really have a heart. He vacillates back and forth. He's nothing like his brother Hector. I mean, most people that read the Iliad like Hector more than Achilles because he's a very noble. In a sense, he's the first knight. And when you read medieval stuff, they treat Hector as the first knight. In fact, if you read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, they trace everything back to Troy, and they talk about Hector and the idea of the knight. He was one of the 9 worthies of the ancient world, as they talked about in there. And Shakespeare mentions in one of his plays. I think it's Love's Labour's Lost. But yeah, it was Hector that becomes the one that is like a knight who is brave, but also, pure and good. And of course, Hector has his impulsive moments and it leads to his downfall as well. But the scene in book 6 when Hector says farewell to his wife Andromache and his little boy Astyanax is one of the most human moments in the ancient world or all of literature. These are real. See, Justin, I get so mad, and they've been doing this even when I was a kid, where they try to make you believe that before the modern world, before feminism, that all men looked upon their wives as cattle. I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, I try to tell the kids, they're talking about your grandmother and your great-grandmother, okay? Was she cattle, okay? There were good men and there were bad men back then, just like there are today. But all you have to do is read the farewell in book 6 of the Iliad between Achilles, and you understand the incredible love and intimacy. Or read about Odysseus and Penelope in the Odyssey. Again, this is just ridiculous, but we've been made to believe it. Look, man, my school is very, very diverse, and I'm friends with lots of folks that are Muslim and from the Middle East, and I said most Muslims treat their wives with more respect than Americans do, and now they treat them as women. They don't treat them as men with breasts, okay? But a lot of them, I mean, there's lots of things in Islam in general that are very bad. But you meet the typical Middle Eastern person, and you will see a respect for their mother, the women in their that exceeds us. Who we think that being a good person is treating men and women exactly the same. That would have been called a sexist when I was a kid. Now you're called the sexist if you don't treat men and women similarly. It was ridiculous. We've lost any sense of the value of womanhood or manhood for that part. And so we've got to get away from this idea. And there were bad people back then, just like there are bad people now.
Right.
But again, women have more political rights nowadays. But to say they're better off, well, they're more anxious, they're more lonely, they're more cut off, they're more disappointed. I mean, it's just that chronological snobbery again that makes us think we're better than all the past eras. Crazy.
And one thing that we kind of touched on with Judd in our last discussion, but I'd like to just maybe go a little deeper and kind of get your thoughts on it, was this was not only a battle of humanity, but this was a battle of the gods.
Right.
You get a lot of interplay back and forth of kind of like how the Bible talks about the divine council.
Right.
God sets him on his throne amongst his holy ones and casts judgment. So it kind of goes back and forth, and you see that there's lines drawn in the heavenly realm. The different gods kind of choose their sides, and throughout this war, they actually take physical form and go down, and they fight, and they encourage, and they devise schemes and do all these things. And there's so much division, even on Mount Olympus. At one point, Zeus has to play the good father and scream at everybody and tell them to stop fighting. And if anybody else interferes, I want to hit you with a thunderbolt. I'm gonna tighten you up, like the Southern man. He shows the belt.
Right, that's right. I mean, the thing is that you read it and you recognize something like the divine council in the Bible. The difference is there's no God, right? Zeus has elements of Yahweh, but he's still a created being himself, and is nowhere near perfect in any way. But it's almost like the pagan writers have an idea that there must be, because there are parts of Greek mythology where it says Zeus is stronger than all the other gods put together. Right? He really is raised up, but he's still a created being. I mean, Poseidon and Hades are his brothers. They're brothers of the same father and mother. So they're not. And it's the same thing when you read the Enuma Elish. Okay, the gods still come out of the chaos, right? There is no God that predates it, right? And what the gods try to do is make order out of chaos. One of the reasons Jordan Peterson talks about order is masculine and chaos is feminine. He knows his Enuma Elish, and Tiamat, who is chaos, who is the dragon, is also feminine. And Marduk is the masculine principle that tries to bring order out of chaos. Now, we all know that oftentimes the flaw in a man is when we as a father or whatever become too orderly and crush everybody, right? But still, the order is needed to hold back the chaos. And we can see that played out. But again, whether the Babylonian or the Greek or the Roman or the Norse, there is no God who is I am that I am, right? The gods come. In other words, only Yahweh does not have a origin story. Okay, every god has an origin story in all the mythology of the world, but God is, right? He is the one who is, and he creates everything, right? You could even say that he creates the chaos that he then orders, whatever. But you do. I mean, for instance, people point to Daniel. Daniel is praying. And after a long time, I think it's Michael, the angel comes to him and says, I am the answer to your prayer. And he's like, well, you took a long time, buddy. He said, well, I'm sorry. I was delayed because I was fighting against the prince of Persia. And it seems pretty clear that what we're talking about is spiritual forces behind these earthly kings, because it makes no sense that this angelic being is fighting a human king of Persia. It is the Elohim, or the spiritual being, that is behind the prince of Persia. And so there is a war, just like, again, epics always take place on two levels, the earthly mortal level and the immortal level, and they're always rubbing against each other, right? And they're always influencing each other. Something is going on in the earthly realms and something else is going on up in the heavenlies, and they influence each other. But once again, only in the Bible do you have God. Okay, you only there do you have a God who is I am that I am. But yeah, we see it. You're right. You see it in the Aeneid as well. But in a sense, it's more powerful in the Iliad and the Odyssey because the Aeneid is a more self-conscious work where Virgil is imitating Homer and doing other things. But when you get Homer, you're getting the raw oral tradition, like coming out of Beowulf or something like that. And you're catching a glimpse of how all these ancient people understand that there are two levels of action and not just one. What's his name? Charles Taylor, right? The famous guy who wrote The Secular Age. He said that before the modern period, before the Enlightenment, we lived in a porous universe, like water going back and forth, porous. So the supernatural realm is affecting the natural back and forth. It's porous. But since the Enlightenment, we live in what he calls a buffered world. We are buffered and we don't feel any fear of that. And I can't remember who said this, but it was so brilliant that in the old porous world, when there was an understanding of spiritual forces and the ancestors and all that sort of stuff, you had all sorts of rituals to protect yourself from that unseen realm. And I loved what this guy said. I can't remember what it was, but in some ways, in the modern world, the way we treat hygiene as a religion. I'm not talking about just, bathe now and then and be careful. I'm talking about hygiene taught as a religion in our public schools. And it's
2019.
What's that?
2019.
Thank you. That's right. With COVID and all, where the ritual and regime of this is going to protect us from the invisible realm. Now, I'm not saying that germs are not real. Germs are very real, and we do have to be careful and take care of ourselves. But we've turned it into a sort of religion. And by the way, C.S. Lewis makes fun of that in the very beginning of Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Eustace Clarence Scrubb always got the highest marks in hygiene in school. So Lewis is making fun of that. If you read that first chapter, that's kind of funny. But again, we think we're safe, but I think we have an inbuilt understanding of an invisible realm that needs to be reckoned with. And like I said, we've just turned it into germs at all. Like there's no supernatural anymore. There's just germs. It's kind of fun. Crazy.
And one thing that I seen, and I might have been looking too deep into it, and I'm guilty of that, was one of the interferences of the gods. One of the interferences of the gods was a swing point in the war. Was the Trojans had them backed up to the ships, and this was during the time when Zeus told them no more interfering.
Right.
And Hera tried to seduce Zeus, and and so she ends up going to Aphrodite,
right,
and gets this girdle of desire, right, and then gets a sleeping potion from the god of sleep. So she's like, "Oh, I want to go seduce him, have sex with him, give him this potion. He's going to go to sleep. Then we can go down, help our opposing sides, and do what we want." So it's like and those were the two that honestly got kind of this thing started, because those two gods were fighting over who was the fairest, involved Paris, and caused this whole conflict. So by those two working together in the heavenlies, putting Zeus to sleep, restored balance back on the battlefield, and ultimately wound up with Troy falling, which was sad for Troy, but ended up restoring everything back to the way it was.
And see, the irony of all of this, Justin, and this is why Zeus does have an element of God, even though he's still a created being. And, okay, all of this starts because Achilles makes a prayer to Zeus through his mother Thetis. And the reason Zeus has to accept Thetis is because he owes her one big time, right? I mean, that's the backstory. And the terrible prayer of Achilles is, "Oh, Zeus, let the Greeks start losing so that they'll realize how important I am, and then they'll beg me to come back." Right? Now, here's the thing. The reason that the reason that Hera does this to Zeus is because she believes that Zeus is helping Hector and the Trojans. And she hates the Trojans because Paris didn't give her the apple. But the irony is that overall, he's only raising up Hector so that Achilles can defeat him. In other words, all along, Zeus is actually on the side of the Greeks, and the Greeks are going to win. But Hera doesn't know that because she's just looking at what's happening and jumping to conclusions. So, and of course, but then the other way, Zeus is not like God, is that when Hector is about to die, Zeus wants to save him. He forgets this was all his plot in the beginning. Earlier on, when Patroclus is going on a roll, Zeus says, as the king of the gods, he says, okay, Patroclus is going to be riled up, and he's going to go and fight, and he is going to gain glory, even killing my son Sarpedon. But then Hector will kill him, and then Achilles will kill Hector. So he has actually prophesied both the death of his son Sarpedon and the death of Hector. And both cases, when it's about to happen, he tries to stop it and is unable to. And when his son Sarpedon dies, one of the most amazing moments in the whole Iliad, it says, "And Zeus wept tears of blood." It's like, wow. Suddenly, this incredible scene. And Hera, in that scene, it's Hera. In book 22, it's Athena. They both tell him, hey, you can't save your beloved because it's going to be a real bad precedent. And then all the gods will want to save their sons and their favorites. And they're, because a lot of the gods are almost patrons, like Athena loves Odysseus and always helps him, even though it's not her son. She's a virgin goddess, first of all. But again, Zeus has a vision that surpasses the other gods, so that makes him like Yahweh. But ultimately, he gets caught in his own traps like everybody else does. So he's not the ultimate God. He is also a created being. He's just stronger. So again, it's very, very complex. I mean, when you read the Iliad and it's got all the repetition because it's based on an oral tradition, sometimes you think, this is just all plot. But the more you read it, the more incredible levels of complexity there are. Even sometimes Homer will use the repetition in a more thematic way, in a more powerful way to make connections between characters and themes and whatnot. So Homer did not write the stories. He got them from the oral tradition, but he perfected them. And a lot of people know that with maybe one or two exceptions, none of Shakespeare's plots are original. He borrowed his plots from all over the place. Sometimes they were like what we would call a soap opera plot. But then he took it and made it into something beautiful. As they said, Shakespeare could take a sow's ear, the pig of an ear, and turn it into a silk purse. And that's what Homer does as well. Because the past was not all based on originality. We think the only important thing is originality. That's not what anybody thought before the Romantic Age. You take what was done before and you perfect it. You add your own genius to it. You give it a new shape and a new form, like they're doing with The Chosen, right? We all know the Bible stories, but along comes Dallas Jenkins and says, let's take a new perspective, basically perspective from the disciples and see what's going on. And so we know the story, but the new perspective opens up levels of meaning we probably missed in the beginning.
Yep. That's what it's all about. That's one thing I always say in the show, it's all about perspective. And sometimes we have to just take a second look at all these things from a different perspective.
From a different lens, maybe a Prometheus lens. That's a good title for a show. Oh, that's what it is. There we go.
Great minds think alike.
That's right.
Yeah.
See, we're zoning in here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, a lot less hair than when you saw me last time. I just shaved it off for the new year. So I
Oh
might be a
yeah.
little too shiny here. You have to watch out. I may blind some of the people watching it. So we'll see if we can get a little glow there.
Yeah. Well, for those that don't know, spoiler alert, the Trojans lose, and it's all by trickery. They end up building this grand horse, and they put like 26 guys or something like that in there, don't they? And then they push the horse out onto the battlefield, and they act like they leave, and they leaving this gift to them in submission, and then they roll the big statue into the inside the walls, and while they're asleep, those men escape and let down the walls, and that is the fall of Troy.
It's amazing. Sometimes I prefer the Trojan rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Remember the Trojan rabbit? They forgot to put people in there, and then it comes catapulting over anyway. But people don't understand that that's not where the Iliad ends. The Iliad ends with the reconciliation of Achilles and Priam, and then they agree to take a hiatus in the war of 2 weeks so everybody can bury their dead. And the last line of the Iliad is, and thus they buried Hector, tamer of horses. So it ends in a lull. Now, everybody knows that 2 weeks later, it's going to start. All this terrible stuff's going to happen, all the death and burning down of the city. But Homer doesn't begin at the beginning and he doesn't end at the ending. It's a beautifully shaped aesthetic thing. You might have learned this in high school, Justin, that epics don't begin at the beginning. They begin in medias res, which is Latin for in the middle of things. We dive in and then we find out. And old Hollywood movies were so good at that. You just dive right in and then we get a flashback to find out what happened before. But for some reason, modern Hollywood thinks flashbacks are old-fashioned. They're old-fashioned. If they work, they work. A lot of the old films were really tightly written, most of them because they were reading Aristotle's Poetics, who teaches you how to write a tight play or a tight script. And I miss those kind of things. And for those people that like old Hollywood, this past summer I published a book called My Life in Film, How the Movies Shaped My Soul. When I look at 20 movies from the golden age of Hollywood, that's the 1930s and 40s, Citizen Kane, Casablanca, Wuthering Heights, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, all these wonderful films, and I talk about them and the message and how they shape me and things. So I'm always trying to do something different. C.S. Lewis is my role model, and C.S. Lewis wrote every kind of genre imaginable. So it's like, let's press ourselves and do things and find goodness, truth, and beauty in all different places, which is kind of what I try to do in my speaking and in my writing. And again, look at it through the new lens and see what we can learn.
That's awesome. Yeah, when that comes out, man, definitely have to bring you back on, and we'll talk about the power of film and let everybody know where they can find that book.
That book's already out. Yeah, that book's
already out.
Yeah, the one that's coming out in the spring is Passing the Torch, an apology for classical Christian education, for an education that brings together Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman. And that's what we're doing. So,
okay, gotcha.
Lots of stuff to talk about.
Oh, yeah, man. I love these conversations. Anytime we can get together and you're willing, I love sitting and just conversating with you. You're a deep well of knowledge, Lou, and I like to get in and get me a swig whenever I can.
There we go. But make sure you choose rightly.
Yes.
Don't
choose wisely.
Choose wisely.
Hey, before we go, Lou, let everybody know where they can find you, man. Thank you.
The easiest thing is just go to Amazon.com and type in Louis Markos, Markos. It's a Greek name, and you'll see all my books are there. If you go to YouTube and type in Louis Markos, I got a YouTube channel with lots of free videos and stuff like that. But that's the best way. Just go to Amazon. I've got all my stuff on there, and it's real easy.
Nice. Hey, well, Lou, thank you so much, man. And I hope you have a very Merry Christmas as the time of this recording, and you have a good, safe trip and a good time with your family, brother.
I should say before I get off, I forgot to say this, that a new movie just came out called The Return with Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche, and it's basically the last half of the Odyssey where Odysseus comes home and defeats the suitors. Now, I haven't heard some good things. I was listening to Andrew Clavin, that's the dude on the Daily Wire, and he was saying that even though it was well made, he did not like the way they modernized it and made it into an anti-war book and all this sort of stuff that would have meant nothing to the audience. So I still need to see it, but most people are saying it is at least very well acted and very well shot. So I will see. But again, I've heard a few people say that it's trying to push a modern ethos on something would not. But again, I'm sure it's really good. I'm waiting to see it. So
yeah. When that trailer come out, actually, Judd had sent me that on Facebook and was like, "Justin, you need to go check this out." And I forgot about it until you mentioned it.
Yeah, and see what it's like. I'm kind of excited. And Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche were in the movie The English Patient together, but that was like 25 years ago or something. It won Best Picture, so it's kind of neat to have a reunion. The first time they've worked together since then, and they're both really great actor and actress. Yeah. All right, well, we'll sign off.
All right, man. Well, thank you, Lou. I appreciate it, guys. Be sure to check out Lou's stuff. Man, he's got so many great books, and honestly, next year, well, actually, probably this year. By the time you watch this, this will probably come out first of the year. But I want to do a study with you guys for my All Access Pass members, and we're going to dive through the Myth Made Fact, because I think that'd be a great study for us. We go through that. That book is very well written, and it's made for study groups. It's got good questions.
And I was interviewed on that book by Michael Heiser before he died.
Yes,
to make all those connections and things like that. Because I'm a Michael Heiser fan too.
Yeah. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Be sure to check out his stuff. And hey, just remember, the difference between the known and the unknown is the journey. Good journey, guys.